Good afternoon. There has been a series of massive explosions at an oil depot in Hertfordshire. The blast ripped through the Buncefield complex near Hemel Hempstead at 6 o'clock this morning. Police are warning there may be further explosions later in the day, and they have told people in the area to stay away from the smoke. 4 people have been seriously injured and another 30 are being treated for minor injuries. The cloud from the explosion is visible on satellite images from space. It has already drifted from the site of the explosion just north of London to south of the capital and north into the Midlands. Richter has all the main events.
It was the biggest explosion in Britain for decades. It left a dense plume of smoke hundreds of metres tall, with almost continuous fireballs rolling into the sky. The initial blast was felt up to 100 miles away. BBC correspondent Colin Campbell was reporting in central London when it went off.
I actually can just tell you that I heard a very, very large explosion just behind me a few seconds ago, so that has slightly put me off. But continuing...
Close to the scene, a CCTV camera caught the moment of the blast, lighting up the sky like an early sunrise. The fierce heat made this a difficult fire to contain, and nearby houses were quickly evacuated. Police are warning that the smoke could still pose a danger to health.
Our very strong advice is that people must keep out of the plume of smoke. And if the windows of your house have been blown out or are damaged, then we would suggest that you should evacuate yourself to somewhere safer.
Nearby roads, including part of the M1, were closed as emergency services dealt with the explosion, which shook many nearby residents from their beds.
Literally 6 o'clock on the button this morning, there was this almighty bang, and obviously lying in bed asleep, and just the whole family were woken, and the house literally tremored.
I got up and I had a look out the window because there was alarms going off all over the place. Actually, I could see these flames just on the horizon over there, and they were monstrous. They were going up 400 or 500 feet in the air.
Buncefield is one of the largest depots in the country, but experts say they are prepared for such a problem and fuel supply lines will not be affected. The main concern now is the possible impact on those living nearby.
If somebody's feeling the effects of smoke, then they should, well, first of all, make sure that they reduce their exposure to it by staying indoors with doors and windows closed, and also, should they be feeling more unwell, to get in touch with the either NHS Direct, contact their GP out of hours, or they can come to the Accident Emergency Department here at Hemel or at their local hospital.
Given the extent of the blast, it seems remarkable there haven't been more serious injuries. Windows have been shattered for miles around, and some properties have suffered structural damage too. Satellite photos show the smoke drifting slowly westwards, and police say the explosions will continue at the site for some time yet. Richard Lister, BBC News.
Well, I spoke to Rahil Ashraf. He was actually in a building at the depot when the explosion happened.
I was just taking a little tour in the offices. I was actually on the top floor, and I could smell a lot of fume. I had no idea where it was coming from because it's an office building, and how would you smell petrol in an office building? It was a matter of a second. It was a humongous blast. I fell down to the ground, and the moment when I opened my eyes, there was nothing left of the building, and it was just a miracle that I was just standing there and I didn't have a scratch on me. The whole building was torn apart, but now I was stuck on the top floor. So the only thing I could do now was jump out the window. Luckily for me, when I looked out the window, there was a lot of gravel, bricks and concrete, which had kind of like raised the car park up a little bit, and I was able to jump down and crawl my way out of the actual car park.
You had to jump out of the building. It must have been absolutely terrifying.
It really, really was. You didn't know what was going on. All I could hear was this long, thundery sound with the after effects of the bang. But you had no idea what had happened. It was a very, very scary experience.
And once you jumped out of the building, what happened then? What could you see?
Well, I was trying to get away from the building as quick as possible. I was falling down on my knees with the shock. Looking back at the building, there was nothing left of it. It was on fire. And I just dragged myself towards the road, and then some chaps over from Northgate ran across, and they grabbed me and took me towards the hut.
And were you injured badly at all?
No, thank God. I just had a couple of scratches, just a little bruise on my knee from when I jumped out the window. Other than that, absolutely fine.
Seems to have been a lucky escape for many. Were there many other people in the area where you were?
Well, there were quite a lot of people working in Northgate because it's open 24 hours, so they're obviously working through the night, and there's a lot of people around. Luckily for me, there were a lot of them around to actually help me. But I think because it was a Sunday morning, early hours, there was not a lot of people around, which was, of course, a good thing.
It's phenomenal seeing the pictures that we're seeing, and these have obviously been taken from a little distance away, but to have been up close to those flames, just describe to us the heat, the smell, what it was like.
Oh, it was awful. It was like you were in hell. The flames were as high as 200 feet, and it just kept rising, and we could literally see the fire growing. And we just had to keep going further and further and further away from the fire because it was just getting completely out of control. It was just growing.
And how quickly were the emergency services there?
They were not, very hard to say, to be honest. I was in shock for about 10-15 minutes. But there was just so much going on. The police were closing off the roads, and you just didn't know what was going on at all.
Were you then taken to hospital?
After my shift manager had turned up, he then took me to an ambulance driver, and after he had a look at me, he told me to go straight to the hospital.
So now, where are you? Are you in an area where you can see what's going on?
No, I actually live quite away from Hemel Hempstead. I live in High Wycombe, but out of my window I can still see the smoke.
When you were there this morning, was the smoke overwhelming you? Did you have trouble breathing with that?
No, because I was taken away from the incident straight away, but I could still feel the fumes whilst I was inside the building. And when the blast happened, I could still feel the fumes inside me. It was the smoke was just horrific.
We're seeing some pictures now of the building, possibly the building you describe. Clearly, many of the windows were blown out there.
That's right. I didn't see one window standing. In fact, along with the window, the actual walls were torn out as well.
Must have been very frightening, just not knowing what was going on, what you were experiencing.
It is very hard to describe. 1 minute everything is fine, and next minute everything just crumbles, and you really don't know what's happened, what's going to happen, and you just try. You're hoping it's a nightmare and you'll wake out of it.
Rahil Ashraf, who was actually in a building on the depot site when the explosion happened. We'll speak to another eyewitness in just a moment, but first I just want to show you some pictures that we are getting in from Redbourne in Hertfordshire, and you can see their queues building up at this particular petrol station. We've been receiving reports of people panic buying, and these are pictures of people appearing to do just that. There is quite a lengthy queue at that petrol station. We spoke to Ray Holloway of the Petrol Retailers Association, and he was appealing to people not to panic buy. He said there is no cause to be concerned that there will be shortages, because he said that there will be a contingency plan, although that the Buncefield depot itself actually feeds filling stations for diesel and petrol, industrial oil and domestic heating oil for North London, Hertfordshire, Buckinghamshire and Northamptonshire. There will be a contingency plan to prevent there actually being fuel shortages, and as he understood it, only one storage tank is affected, so he was confident, no need to be concerned about shortages, but people are queuing up this morning to get their petrol. Well, I said we'd speak to another eyewitness, Jane Russell. She lives near to the depot. We actually spoke to her earlier, shortly after the blast happened, and we can speak to her again now. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
you spoke to us earlier. Just tell us what the situation is for you now.
The situation is a lot calmer where we are, because obviously we're not as close as those in Leverstock Green and such like. The clear sky is still very, very black, although the sun is trying to creep underneath it, and there is a very strong acrid smell outside. So obviously staying in as much as possible.
So at the moment you're staying put in your house. No one's told you that you have to leave.
No, nobody's told us that we had to leave, and nobody's told us where we are that we've had to stay in. But obviously the smell outside is quite strong, so it's obviously better to stay inside.
Does the smoke seem to be moving quite quickly and dispersing at all, or is it remaining quite static?
No, it's moving. It's certainly moving over. I've got relatives in Park Street who say that they're now getting very black that way, so it appears to be going across from St Albans Park Street, and it's clearing, being narrower where we are, and the main, if you like, saucepan lid of smoke has moved over.
Are you having much contact with other people? The police earlier advised people to stay inside their homes and really just tune into the media to find out what's happening.
No, because I don't live in Hemel Hempstead itself. I live across the field, so we actually live on a farm. So although I saw it about half a mile of it this morning, we walked to the back of the fields to see what was happening. So I'm not within the catchment area of the police coming to say to stay in or anything like that.
A dramatic Sunday for you and for all of the others in that area. I mean, we're watching the pictures of the explosion, the immediate aftermath, those incredibly huge flames. Just describe how it was for you. It must have been frightening.
It was an enormous bang, and everybody around within a wide area has said about how the houses shook, and obviously our house shook as well. It did blow the fire. We have a wood-burning stove which blew the ash down, so there was a backdraft. So it's quite surprising the air pressure that must have been around to have caused that. It also caused my father-in-law's loft hatch to fly open, and he's in further away from us in St Albans. So the power of the actual blast was horrendous. So I do feel dreadfully sorry for those that live near to the actual depot. Must have been even worse, and friends have said how they've been blown out of bed. We went walk to the back fields, as I said, within half a mile. You could clearly see the tanks. There is a main part of the terminal, and then there's a separate part that's across the road, which is more where the aviation fuel is kept, and that's the part that was on fire when we got to the back field. One of the tanks looked like a Christmas pudding that had brandy poured on the top. It was just literally the top of the tank where the flames was coming from, so obviously the top had blown out. There was about 5 tanks then that were on fire. The rest appeared safe. The main Buncefield terminal on the other side of the road appeared safe. There was a lot of blue lights flashing, so police had responded. Emergency service obviously very quick. On Buncefield itself, there is huge water lakes, so we're aware that they have regular fire alerts and things to test their services. So I'm sure that they had all the necessary equipment in action. Locally, I was asked earlier about people's feelings about having a oil depot near homes. There has been over the years different media coverage regarding people's feelings about having that, and I think at times people have said that it could be dangerous, but I do think they've also thought about that, hopefully, in their safety. And going by what's happened today, taken on board, it's such a huge depot, and there are massive amount of fires taken off up there. The damage doesn't seem as bad as what you'd have expected, really, in that sort of volume of fuel and such like.
Well, Jane Russell, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us here on BBC News 24. And the good news is the fire is contained, although the fire service say it may burn for some days to come because they can't tackle it immediately, but it is contained. Well, let's speak to Captain Carl Gray from the Salvation Army. He's helping to take care of some of those affected by this. Captain Gray, just tell us what you have been doing this morning.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, I got a call about 6:30, 6:45. I actually live and work in London Central area, and we have an emergency vehicle that helps the fire brigade out in London most of the time of the year. We got a call just to say, could we get our emergency vehicle up to Hemel as quickly as we possibly could to Jarman Retail Park, where they were evacuating some of the residents who live close to the site. So when we got there, it's a matter of just helping these people, giving them hot drinks, some sandwiches, because obviously they've been woken up quite early in the morning and out without anything to eat, really. So that's what we did to start with. The local authority got involved in that quite quickly as well, and providing them with drink and food. So we've now relocated ourselves to the M10 northbound towards the M1, where we are providing refreshments and support for the emergency services who are sat on the sort of hard shoulder waiting to be used, really. So that's where we are at the moment.
And are there any motorists stuck? Because, of course, there are a lot of road closures around there.
Yeah, we didn't see any. We came over from Hemel Hempstead onto the M10, and everywhere was closed off. You can't get very close at all. Where we are at the moment, all we can see is clouds of black smoke going up over the trees, and the odd explosion in the distance. So obviously things are still burning quite fiercely there.
In terms of those that you were helping who have been actually taken out of their homes, they've had to leave their homes and go to the retail park that you were mentioning, how many people are in that situation?
I would have said probably around about 50 to 100 people were located inside the centre there, just wanting somewhere warm to sit and get some hot drinks inside of them, as well as a lot of the emergency services down there as well. Ambulance service trying to look after them and sort of keep a register who's been evacuated to that particular site. So that's now all being coordinated by the local authority.
Captain Carl Gray of the Salvation Army, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Well, the concern right now is that smoke, that huge cloud of smoke that we've been showing you that's drifting very slowly away from Hemel Hempstead. Dan Corbett from the BBC Weather Centre is with me. We'll talk about that cloud of smoke in just a moment, but first I wanted to ask you about how on earth people an awfully long way away from this explosion heard it at 6 o'clock this morning.
It sounds bizarre because there have been reports, people in as far away as Kent, even the Low Countries, Holland, weather has something to do with it. The mere fact that this morning, many people remember it was quite a frosty, quite a foggy morning, and the way what essentially happened was there was a temperature inversion. So as the temperature cooled last night, the surface of the Earth, the air at the surface, close to the surface, cooled much more quickly than, say, about 1,000 feet or 2,000 feet above. So the air normally sort of temperatures to decrease with height, but in this particular case this morning, there was this inversion. So in other words, there was warmer air, the air was warmer above the actual ground surface. So we had the frost, we had the fog, but what it actually did was, when there was this blast, instead of the blast just sort of going off and then just radiating out and you'd go up into the upper levels of the atmosphere, the sound, because this inversion was in place, think of it like a blanket. You put a blanket over the lower levels of the atmosphere and then you let the explosion go. So it's going to hit this blanket and then it's going to reverberate out, but when it goes out, it's going to go a lot further out wide, as opposed to if it was able to radiate out and go up. But because of this temperature inversion or warmer air blocking it, the sound, that's why you could hear it in places like Kent and even the Low Countries.
Yes, we've had an email in from somebody in Holland, we also northern France and all over the southeast of England. That smoke that I was mentioning, it doesn't seem to be moving very fast. Just explain to us exactly where it is and whether it is starting to disperse at all.
It is dissipating somewhat. You can see the picture here. Obviously the green is the land. The white blob in the top right-hand corner, that's just regular cloud, regular what we call stratus cloud. But obviously the thing that comes to eye is that big black blob, literally where London would be. On the top, think of that as a triangle. On the top edge of that triangle would be where the actual smoke plume is emanating from. And as I mentioned, this inversion, think of it how the smoke goes up. And anyone that's close to this particular smoke, or when we look at the pictures, the video, you can see how the smoke plume is going up. Instead of, because there's this warmer layer of air above the ground surface, the smoke plume goes up and then it starts to sort of tilt sideways. See how it's going like that, as opposed to like with a volcano or something, it would go straight up, or on a sunnier day you'd see chimneys that go straight up. That means the air would be, it would be sort of warm and just going, but this inversion allows some of the actual particles in that smoke plume to stay close to the surface. That's why they're obviously advising people, if you're close to it, to stay indoors, because it's not being allowed to escape as it would do into the atmosphere. The winds are light as well, which doesn't really help. It helps obviously with the fire, at least containing it in that sense, but the winds aren't able to disperse. They are dispersing it, and that satellite picture showed before, it's now, the top edge of it is coming to, for instance, places like London, and people can probably see it as far southwest as Reading, and it's continued to move away, and the speeds of it, the winds are fairly light. At its lowest levels, maybe are only 3 to 5 miles an hour. At its higher levels, it is getting up to sort of 5 to 10,000 feet, the very top bit. That's moving at about 15 miles an hour, but it is very slow, and it's just slowly working its way, probably sort of southwards, obviously towards London, and then perhaps spots south and maybe west of that.
So how long might it linger and cause a problem for people?
Well, that's the thing. Of all days, today is one of those days where we have very light winds, a weak little ridge of high pressure in place. There is one little saving grace in the sense that there's a weak weather front across the northern parts of Britain. That's working down our way tonight and will probably sit across much of the southern UK tonight. So it's going to be quite a stagnant, murky end to the day. The smoke will probably just linger at its sort of levels, and even through the night. But then we'll also get this band of this weather front, which could have some rain on it, which, imagine all the particles in the atmosphere. Rain will essentially, almost like a car wash them out of the atmosphere. So there could be that problem. But eventually, this weather front should move off the south coast in towards the near continent, and think of it just like taking a windshield wiper and just going zoom, cleaning the screen. It will eventually then just clean the air, but obviously this smoke plume will still be going tomorrow morning, and perhaps beyond that. So then, depending on how the winds are going at that point, it still might be an issue.
We spoke to someone earlier whose son was asthmatic, and he was leaving the area simply because he was worried about the potential impact of that smoke. Smog, is smog going to be a concern? Because obviously that is a worry for people who are asthmatic, for the elderly, for anybody vulnerable in that area.
It's a great possibility. And purely because of the fact that there are all these particulates, the smoke, being spewed into the atmosphere. It's not as if we have at the moment any great winds to clean them out. So people could just look out and see it. It's lingering in some respects. And it's that lower section, if you see the plume, where it's just very close to the ground surface, it's that section that causes the problem.
Okay, Dan. Well, thank you very much for explaining all of that for us. Thank you. Well, we've heard from many of you this morning, many eyewitnesses, people living close to the explosion. Here are some stories of what people saw and heard.
About approximately 6 o'clock, I heard a hell of a loud bang. Wasn't exactly sure what it was first. It sounded maybe thunder or something like that, but it didn't sound like thunder. So lay on in bed for a while. I didn't actually notice anything was untoward at the time, and I got up and I had a look out the window because there was alarms going off all over the place. Actually, I could see these flames just on the horizon over there, and they were monstrous. They were going up 400 or 500 feet in the air, and obviously realised something serious. I thought it might have been the BP garage that had gone up, say initially, because that's in almost the exact same line, and it just got louder and louder. There were several other explosions subsequent to that, and my porches got damaged, neighbours' front doors got blown in, and we just went down to the shop to see what was going on. We saw it on the news, and as you can see, the smoke around you is horrendous.
What happened to your porch?
The glass in the porch got blown in. was all smashed and the front door was forced open as well. Front door is okay. Front door is inside the porch. That was driven in, but the glass in the porch was all smashed.
And has it ever occurred to you before there might be problems?
No. It seems a safe distance from almost anywhere like that. It's because I'm about a half a mile. I'm about a half a mile away from it, or so, or a mile away from it. And other than that, it just seems safe. Yes.
Well, that was some eyewitnesses with their experiences. Some of the injured were taken to Hemel Hempstead General Hospital. Around 30 were treated and they've now been discharged from there. They were treated for cuts and bruises. There was one patient with breathing difficulties who had to be transferred to Watford General. But the hospital does remain on high alert amid fears there may be more explosions.
Well, we remain on a standby footing. We are aware that there may be further explosions, and so from that point of view it's a possibility that there may be further injuries. We can't tell at this stage. We would hope not. But if that were the case, we would anticipate that those might be related to blast injury from further explosions, and so we are making sure that we've got sufficient respiratory support, intensive care unit support should patients arrive who've been affected by blast injury from explosions.
Well, that was the latest there from Hemel Hempstead General Hospital. Let's speak to Ray Holloway. He's from the Petrol Retailers Association and is with us because there have been reports of panic buying of petrol this morning. Ray, what are you hearing?
Yes, quite a lot of panic buying this morning, which is totally unnecessary. A bizarre example would be that I was alerted to some cases in Croydon in South London. And of course, this is a location where you would never have deliveries into that area from this particular depot in Buncefield.
Are people right to be concerned, though? This is actually pictures that we've had in from Redbourne in Hertfordshire, where obviously people have been queuing for fuel. The Buncefield depot, I mean, where does that supply?
Herts, Beds and Bucks, I think, is an easy way to sum that up, and perhaps into North London as well. But really, it's strategically important as a depot, and I'm not trying to play down what's happened there this morning. But it isn't critically important. It's not the only source of oil into that area, because being in the heavily populated southeast, there are many other alternative depots that will now step in and provide into the Hemel Hempstead area rather than out of it.
But might there be some sort of short-term supply concern?
No, I don't expect so. You know, the motorist really will inflict what I call self-inflicted pain here if they go on queuing this afternoon and make it difficult in the early part of the week, because there's no need to. The simple fact is the oil industry, heavily regulated and paranoid about emergencies such as this, and well-practiced drills will now come into play, and deliveries will start to be switched to other depots. So if everyone takes this calmly, there's no need to say that the start to this week won't be like every other.
If there is panic buying, though, as we're seeing, and it does carry on, how long does it take for that sort of level of buying to actually start to have an impact on supplies and for then to become a self-fulfilling prophecy? Well,
broadly 2 or 3 days. But really, I think, you know, the trouble with oil is when it burns, it often looks much worse than it is. And we're seeing the worst of the smoke coming out of the Buncefield depot now. When that's actually sort of known as to how bad the emergency is, we'll know what fuel stocks are actually affected there. But the delivery vehicles that normally would start their day at Buncefield Terminal will now be switched to others. And therefore, it's just really a normal day coming from other sources. I really do stress that motorists in this area, or indeed any other, have got nothing to fear. It's a very robust industry, this. Let's prove it. Please don't buy, and there'll be fuel there at the beginning of the week.
What about the impact on the aviation industry? Because this depot supplies fuel to the airports as well, doesn't it?
Well, yes, it does, but the major airports, Gatwick, Heathrow, Stansted even, there's a self-sufficiency about supplies into those airports, and therefore, again, I stress, this is a source of fuel for those airports, but it's top-up more than critical supply. Luton and other local airports may, in fact, be affected. But affected, I just simply mean that the normal supply process will have to be switched to other sources as well.
Ray Holloway, thank you very much. Well, we have been speaking to many eyewitnesses throughout the morning here on BBC News 24. The explosion happened at 6 o'clock, and we spoke to David Kirk. He works for a security company, and he was actually working at the time of the explosion.
We look after several buildings on the estate within a quarter of a mile of the depot. Indeed, one of our buildings adjoins a depot, and one of the tanks is like a few yards from the building. I had officers in the 3 sites, and I was there in about 10 minutes. I saw the explosion as I was coming to Hemel from Tring. Saw the big flash in the sky, and immediately my security officer rang me and said, there's been a big explosion in the oil depot behind us. All very shook up. So I was there in about 10 minutes, and there's further explosions, and it was horrendous, the flames and smoke. All the back of the building had been blown in. It was a real mess. The next door building, which was a big empty huge great warehouse, all the aluminium walls had all been blown in. I went up to my other two sites, and one of my guards, whose building faces the depot, he was flown straight across the reception area, and the whole of the front of the building is devastated. There's no glass. All the offices are all smashed in really badly. He was very shook up. So we relieved him, and the police came, and they told us to vacate the area totally. But the devastation in that estate is, it's absolutely incredible.
We're seeing very dramatic pictures that were taken by an eyewitness early on. It must have been a terrifying sight to greet you.
It was indeed, and we tried, in one of our sites, seen on screen, they got all the water sprinklers started pouring out all over the stock, and we couldn't get the sprinklers off. But I got my guards off the site because I was worried about there's going to be another explosion, because with the fire brigade told us that four tanks had gone up, and there's another 20 or 30 tanks there. If it gets them, there could be more explosions. So I was worried that there could be more of the walls coming in.
So you managed quite quickly to account for all of your employees?
Yes, we did indeed. We got them all out, and all the night guards, which we was relieving at 6 o'clock. It was a great time. We got them home, and they're home now, but speaking to them all, none of them go to sleep, as you can imagine, because they're so shook up.
It's merciful that there weren't more casualties in this. 36, as we understand it, the total number of casualties, and most of those have been minor injuries. How many people would have been on site at this time? It would have been quite quiet.
At 6 o'clock we do the handover, so there would have been 6 on site. But fortunately I had to go to Tring to do an unlock, so I was a little bit late with one of my other security officers. So we got a little bit late, which was fortunate, because we could have all been standing outside the car park, where all the walls actually, from the next joining building, all the aluminium walls came down onto where we would have been standing. So it was very fortunate. We was diverted. Normally 6 o'clock's our handover time.
Sure. Would everybody working on this site have been prepared for something like this? Do events like this get rehearsed?
Not as such, no, because it's something which you don't really... We're aware, obviously, of all the dangers and health and safety issues, which we have to go through. But something like this, I don't think anyone really could be totally prepared for.
Tell us more about the damage that you saw. You described very eloquently the damage at the site itself. What about further afield?
Well, we've got some premises opposite the vent was blown in. That's all the front of that building. All the glass has gone. All the doors are blown in. And obviously it's made quite a mess, because where they got the false ceilings in all the buildings have all come down, because false ceilings are not very secure up there, as you well know. The blast has pulled all them down. All the lights are down everywhere. But the main building right near the site, the offices in the front, so it just opened all the windows, strangely enough, and didn't do any damage to glass. But the back of the building, which is facing the depot, all the walls, the aluminium walls and the roof has all been pushed off. So we're very concerned with the fact that we've got millions of pounds worth of stock exposed to anybody. But the police have assured us that no one's being allowed anywhere near any of the buildings.
That's David Kirk. He was one of the eyewitnesses to that explosion, and the extraordinary pictures that you're just watching now are pictures that have been sent in to us by a viewer. And thank you very much, those of you who have been sending pictures in. Do send us any footage that you might have, stills or video. You can send it to yourpics@bbc.co.uk. It's been very useful this morning, and we'd be very pleased to receive more from you. Well, we can also hear now from some more residents who awoke to that explosion at 6 o'clock this morning.
Just after 6 this morning, there's a massive bang. The curtains blew up into the air. A massive light. Didn't quite know what had happened. Thought that potentially a car could have gone on fire or something outside the house. put the lights on, saw the amount of glass just shattered all over the room. Came downstairs, tried to open the door. It was slightly jammed, so we had to try and get that open. And then as we came outside, everyone was outside trying to see what damage had been done to the houses. And then in the distance over there, all you could see was just a massive, like a fireball in the air.
When it happened, I thought like an aeroplane was coming through the house or something, or one of the trees fell down. So yeah, it's very scary.
And you've got quite a bit of damage, haven't you?
Yeah, the windows are blown through and the shed windows blown through as well. So there's cracks down the walls and that.
Worried about staying here now after this?
Well, yeah, the smoke's a bit worrying. I mean, the fire, I don't know if they're going to get it under control and how long it's going to take. It's obviously it's oil and that, so it's not something they can just put out straight away.
Well, we've been told by the police that they are treating this as an accident. They're keeping an open mind until they can confirm completely it's an accident. But that's how they are viewing this. Let's speak to Jeff Daniels. He's with me. He's an engineer and an expert on the fuel industry. Thank you for coming in to speak to us. This was a huge explosion.
It appears to have been a very big one indeed. I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, this looks like at least a 7 in oil industry terms. A massive explosion.
And what do you think might have caused it?
Well, basically there is only one cause for a fire like this, an explosion like this. You have to have a lot of vapour laying around. In other words, a leak happened somewhere, and then you need a spark, and that sets it off. Clearly this was a big leak. There was a lot of vapour to explode. Normally there are systems which detect leaks, so something must have happened there in the way of a failure. Also, any depot like this is subdivided so that if one tank catches fire, it doesn't set fire to all the others. This explosion has clearly jumped those barriers because it looks as though a great deal of the site is on fire. So we're looking at something truly massive.
When you mean a storage tank, the main storage tank for the fuel?
One of the tanks, there are 26 tanks I think at this site. All you really need is one of them to spring a leak, probably at a connection where a pipe runs into or out of it. As I say, normally that kind of thing is detected and the operators are warned about it. In this case it slipped through the net, a lot of fuel must have seeped out and evaporated. It sits around, if it's petrol or LPG, those are the two things that the industry is really worried about. Then all you then need is a spark, and sparks are very difficult to guard against, and you've got your explosion.
As we talk to you, we're watching live pictures coming to us from the helicopter, and that really gives a sense of the scale of this, that huge cloud of smoke that's spreading away from Hemel Hempstead, from the site of this